Madam Secretary, the streaming has started and we have no public callers signed up at this time.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Good morning, everyone. I really, again, have to thank you for your flexibility and your commitment. Thank you for getting on the call this morning. We have one item on our action agenda, and before we move forward, I'm going to turn this over to Allison DeTonk.
Good morning. In light of the continuing state of emergency declared by Governor Northam, where it is impractical or unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, I move that we adopt this agenda to take action to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue the operation of the Commonwealth Transportation Board.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Mathis, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown.
Here.
Ms. DeTonk.
Yay.
Mr. Dodson.
Yes.
Ms. Hines.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Kaspowitz.
Yes.
Mr. Malden.
Yes.
Mr. Merrill.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Rucker.
Yay.
Mr. Smoot.
Yes.
Mr. Stinson.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Yates.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion's passed.
Ms. Mathis, and with that, I am going to turn this over to our Deputy Secretary, Nick Donahue.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board for the time to be with you this morning. Carol, can we, folks, can Jen pull up the presentation? So thank you. So members of the board, we wanted to meet with you this morning to discuss with you your potential consideration of submitting a project for consideration under Smart Scale. Just a quick refresher of how this policy works and how some of the procedures work. Under your adopted 6-year improvement program policy, which was put in place in 2016, during the Smart Scale evaluation period, which is say prior to January when scores come out, the board has the option at its discretion to add up to 2 projects for consideration. And so what we would like to speak with you about this morning and put before you for your consideration is the submittal of a potential Smart Scale project that would look at expanding and enhancing passenger rail service along the US 2981 corridor. As a quick refresher, again, before we get into some of the specifics, the board has done this before in round 2. The board submitted the revised Route 460 project. So again, not the full 55 miles, but if you recall the revised alignment that came out of the supplemental environmental impact statement that was completed, we submitted that project for consideration. Ultimately, it was not funded, but it was submitted by the board for evaluation. It was one of the projects that we looked at in round 2. And again, ultimately at that time, the board decided not to move forward with that. So just with a little bit of background of that nature, I just wanted to kind of say that at the outset. If we could move to the next slide. So the project we would like for the board to consider submitting is one that would improve rail capacity along the US 2981 corridor, and some of the key kind of outcomes of this, which is what would be evaluated in Smart Scale, would be the addition of a second daily round trip frequency between DC and Roanoke, Virginia, and then in the future, the extension of both the existing train as well as the second round trip train from Roanoke to the New River Valley. And so again, this is the outcomes that would be achieved by this project. This is again a potential project we're asking you to submit. And again, some of the specifics as to the improvements or other aspects of exactly how the partnership with Norfolk Southern would work are still being discussed between the Commonwealth and Norfolk Southern. So this is an ongoing discussion. Jen, if you could move to the next slide. We have looked at, the ridership for this potential package improvements. We do think that in year one. This would add around 80,000 new riders to the existing rail ridership we have in Western Virginia. And just as a quick reminder, typically with intercity rail service and transit service, what we see is what we call a ramp-up period, where in the initial years, you start at kind of a lower level of ridership, though I think 80,000 is pretty significant. And then over time, that increases. And so I think, when the first train to Lynchburg started, so you can see today we're at, around 200,000 riders. I believe it was much closer to, I think it was around 100,000. So, we've had almost steady year over year growth with, I think, one exception there. So, we have analyzed this. We do think there is a significant potential for new riders along this corridor from this extension. Jen, if you can move to the next slide. So what the application, that the board could consider submitting, would do is request $50 million in smart scale funding. The total project cost at this time is something that is still subject to the negotiations that are ongoing with Norfolk Southern. I do want to note that the total cost is not $50 million. It would be something north of that. The other potential funding sources that would help close out any potential partnership here that we're discussing would include the funds that the Governor Northam announced yesterday, the one-time general fund dollars of $50 million that were included in his amendments to the biennial budget, potential funds from the Commonwealth Rail Fund, dollars from the multimodal and speed enforcement pot in the I-81 corridor improvement program. And again, as a quick reminder there, that entire program is $2.2 billion. $2 billion of that is highway capacity improvements, but there was $200 million that you all set aside for operational multimodal truck parking and speed enforcement improvements. We've spent about 43 of that, leaving $157 million in that pot. And then finally, there are discretionary federal grants that we think this project could potentially be competitive for. And if we were able to reach a successful conclusion, we would aggressively seek. And so moving on to the last slide that I have here for you this morning, again, you have the option as the board in your discretion to submit up to 2 projects for evaluation in smart scale. What we're asking for is for you to submit a request of $50 million to add a second train, for a project that would add a second train in Western Virginia and extend both the existing and this new train to the New River Valley. This does not predetermine any outcomes as to whether or not this project ultimately would be recommended for funding or selected for funding by the board. What the vote before you today does is allow this project to be eligible for funding in the future. And so again, under the Code of Virginia, a project cannot receive smart scale dollars unless it has been evaluated through the evaluation process in the normal course. And so submitting this project, again, would simply make this project eligible and retain flexibility for the board in the future if ultimately you decided this is something that you wanted to fund next spring as the result of the completion of any ongoing discussions. So, Madam Secretary, I know that's probably sets a world record for the amount of time a presentation of mine has been completed in, but that is actually all I have to say today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you or other members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Donahue. I will just add 2 points to your presentation. The first is that the governor announced his budget on Wednesday, and I know our days and nights are all colliding. And so anyway, I just wanted to clarify that point. The ridership for the Lynchburg train initially was predicted to be 51,000, and it turned out to be 126,000 that first year. So we have certainly been growing, and I believe Jennifer Mitchell can confirm that this train has the highest ridership in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So with that, I will open it up to the board for any comments or questions.
Madam Secretary, I had a question. This is Mark Merrill.
Mr. Merrill, good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
I am well. So happy to be with you. That's what I would say.
Well, thank you. My question was, in terms of what I saw from the slide from Mr. Donahue, was that it's going to be northbound in the afternoon, southbound in the morning, which implies that people are coming from the northern part of the state, the Commonwealth, into Roanoke. And I'm assuming are those students or is that for work? I was surprised it wasn't the other way around, that people from the valley going towards DC for work. And then my second question was related to, and I apologize because this may be ground you've already covered, but the potential diversion or allocation of funds from the I-81 corridor, does that have any adverse consequences for the I-81 plan? So two questions.
Okay, very, very good questions. And I'll go ahead and turn this over to Mr. Donahue. I will just say that the current train leaves in the morning and then heads north to DC, which arrives late morning. I know the Lynchburg train leaves around 7:35 and arrives around 11:35 into DC. So the idea is to start creating that loop, so there's more flexibility for people. I think there was a concern that you'd have two trains 30 minutes apart leaving in the morning. So we're really working on that loop along the 95, along the 29 corridor. There's also the Crescent, which arrives, I know, in Lynchburg around 6 o'clock in the morning. So anyway, we're really trying to create a system that has some meaningful times for the people who live along this corridor. Your second question, Mr. Donahue, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary, and you hit it nail on the mark with that first question there. We're just trying to create a more flexible schedule there where people have more travel options. And as the Secretary noted, the current train's in the morning, and so having one in the afternoon really creates more flexibility for kind of users along the corridor. Mr. Merrill, with regard to your second question, this will not have an impact on the $2 billion highway capacity program within the Interstate 81 corridor plan and program that the board adopted. Again, when the board adopted that program in December of 2018, it did envision that there was $200 million that would be available for things like truck parking, freight rail, passenger rail transit, speed enforcement, and operational improvements along that corridor. That is separate from the $2 billion. And so again, we have always been solving for a $2.2 billion program, and this will have no impact on those highway capacity projects or their schedules. We are, for the highway projects, again, a lot of that is actually going to end up being, we intend that much of that would end up being debt financed through the bond authorization the General Assembly just provided for us. And so again, this was always something, using funds for a purpose of this nature, it's always something that was envisioned by that program, and again, was set aside in the initial plan that the board adopted and then reconfirmed in the program that was put in place by the General Assembly, the 81 Committee, and again, the CTB.
Thank you. So it will be a loop then. So there'll be a morning departure from Roanoke and a morning departure from DC, and vice versa in the afternoon.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. And
Madam Secretary,
Ms. Hines.
thank you. I'm mindful of the fact that when a jurisdiction submits a smart scale application, that there's quite a bit of information that's required, and also that they generally have to demonstrate that the project's fully funded. This seems different to me from that, and it might be just useful, I think, for listeners, for Nick to walk through how this application gets fully fleshed out in the analysis.
So, Madam Secretary, Ms. Hines, that's a great question. So this will follow a process very similar to what the 460 project the board submitted in 2016 would follow. And so the responsibility for fully fleshing out this application will fall to the staff at the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Just as with the 460 project, that responsibility fell to the staff of VDOT. The one area where I anticipate there will be some engagement with the local officials is on the economic development sites adjacent to some of the stations. And so I do anticipate that, the DRP staff will be engaging some local staff as they work to fully flesh out the application there. But there's not a new responsibility that all of a sudden, if you were to choose to vote this, the local governments along that corridor suddenly have here in kind of the holiday period. That is going to be a responsibility of DRPT. And then to the second question, Ms. Hines, what we have kind of traditionally done with certain projects, and like an example here would be the Fairfax County BRT. When they submitted that project, they indicated that their intent was to apply for the Federal Transit Administration's New Starts project, but at that time they had not completed the New Starts process, and actually I don't believe they still have, though they are advancing through it. And so they essentially said, if we are unsuccessful there, we will find a way to kind of cover that. And so ultimately, as we continue down these discussions, before you all ever, if you choose to submit this, and if it were recommended for funding, prior to you ever voting to add it for funding in the June program, it would be the responsibility of DRPT to demonstrate to the board a fully funded, a method, to fully fund all the costs associated with the project. So prior to any formal action to include in the program, that information will be available to the board.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Madam Secretary, this is Shep.
Mr. Miller.
Good morning and congratulations. Let me add my congratulations to you on the transit award. That's extremely impressive. And as you said, you needed a big team to make that happen, and you got a great
Yeah.
one. So congratulations.
Yes, I will say in transportation, there is no award that actually goes to a person. It truly is all of us, and this board knows that. I believe more than anybody. So, but thank you, Mr. Miller.
Of course, if there's something bad really happened, they'd point at you. So when something good really happens, we point at you. So congratulations. That's the way it works. Nick, to Mary's point, I guess a little bit. I guess we're trying to advance this at this meeting this way because of timing of the submission needs to be made now in order to get it in. Is that correct?
Mr. Miller, that is correct.
Okay. And secondly, in staff discussions about this, are there other projects that come to mind that would be competitive in the sense of things that you think we might be wanting to advance in addition or other than this project through our 2 submission opportunity?
Mr. Miller, there were no other projects that we identified this round that we are recommending to bring forward at this time.
So the logic would be if this is a good project and it's not competitive and we think it brings great value, then we ought to do it. Is that the basic logic?
I think the logic is that there is an opportunity to partner with Norfolk Southern to implement the service that I talked about, and absent the project being submitted for Smart Scale, if next year we are able to conclude our discussions with Norfolk Southern in a manner that the board finds appropriate and worthy of advancement, absent submitting this project today, you would not have any flexibility under the Code of Virginia to be able to even consider the use of Smart Scale funds as a part of that funding package.
Great. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Mr. Smoot?
Madam Secretary, Dotson.
Mr. Dotson?
Yeah, I got 2 questions. What was the total amount of the project altogether? And the second one is, do we have to wait until the Christiansburg station is operational to begin the service? And or do we just start the service when everything is in line in relation to the funding and et cetera, the train starting and run up?
Really
so
good.
Madam Chair, Mr. Dotson. So the answer to your first question is that is to be determined, and something that we hope to have a clear and firm answer for you sometime in the new year. As I mentioned, we are still in ongoing discussions with Norfolk Southern at this time, and as I think the Secretary had said earlier, and I believe the Governor said earlier this week, we are working towards a deal. We do not yet have a deal, and so that's why we do not have a firm figure to provide for you today. But again, as I mentioned in my response to Ms. Hines, that is something that we would need to have prior to you all, if you choose to submit this and if you recommend it for funding, that we would need to have for you prior to any formal action by the board to consider to formally use any Smart Scale dollars on this project. With regard to your second question about the service levels, there is certainly flexibility in that a second frequency could run prior to the completion of any necessary improvements in the New River Valley to allow service to go there. So it's not necessarily that this all happens at once. It likely could happen in a phased sequence.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Jerry, it's Mary again. Just
else? Oh, Mary.
sorry. Nick, walk us through what happens in Smart Scale in the next couple of months. Just so we're all clear.
So, Madam Secretary, Ms. Hines, what will happen again? And some of this is in the code, and some of it is in board policy, and then some of it is in board precedent. So I'm going to kind of generally go through it, and if you have specific questions about, well, why is that required? Let me know, and I can kind of call that out. What will happen in January at your meeting, and this is when they all become live, you will receive a set of scores for all projects that have been submitted and verified through the Smart Scale process for statewide. In addition to that, at that time, you will receive what is called the staff recommended funding scenario, which I always want to note is just that and is a procedure that's actually set out in law, which is essentially saying you recommend the highest scoring projects until you don't have enough money to fund the next highest scoring project. Then what essentially would take place in the months after that is we answer any questions you guys have about the scores or any issues that you might see. And I think it's always worth noting no process is perfect. And so we have from time to time found one or two scores where something was off and we had to go back and adjust that. Our goal has always been to be as transparent as possible with the board and to recognize that as soon as possible. After that, you guys will, I assume, what happens, because this doesn't always happen to me, but you all seem to get a lot of feedback from our local partners and our regional partners about their preferences for projects that either almost made it or didn't make it, but they really think should. And then we kind of engage in discussions with you all about any modifications you might want to make to the staff recommended scenario, typically culminating in a vote in April or May on any potential modifications to that scenario, within a final vote either May or June, again, depending on the timing of things, for what we call the consensus scenario, which ends up being the list of projects that receive Smart Scale funding that year. One thing of note is, I believe every single round there have been modifications to the staff recommended scenario. So, again, how that is developed is set out in law. And I think as the former Secretary of Transportation said, the Smart Scale process doesn't take away the board's brain. And so there's still value judgments and other things that, you all as duly appointed members empowered by the General Assembly to develop our 6-year improvement program are allowed to impart upon the process over that 6-month period.
And so, Nick, just to be absolutely clear, this project would be part of what is made public. The scoring on this project would be made public at our meeting in January.
It would be treated just like any other product that's been submitted, Ms. Hines. And so again, that's why, to Mr. Miller's point, this is a timing thing. It is kind of, we need to, if the board wishes to go along with this recommendation, this is the time in which we would need to do so. We cannot come back in January after scores have been released and be like, hey, we have this new idea we'd really like to throw in now that we've scored all the projects. It's really something we want to have done in advance of all the scores being completed and the recommended scenarios being developed.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, this is Allison. Just a quick question regarding the evaluation process. Would this be evaluated under the New River Valley District or the Stanton District category, or?
Mr. Tunk, so I think what we would end up doing is looking at what is the area type the majority of the stations that are served by this enhanced service are located in, and likely score the product under that. We have had this before where a project crossed 2 different area types, if you will, and the way we adjudicated that in the past is we said, well, 60% is in this area type, so that's the area type that we are going to use for this. If you look at the various stops along the way, I believe most are in area type B or C, and so we would need to select one of those most likely for use.
Thank you.
Director Mitchell, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think Nick's done a really good job of summing everything up, but we're certainly very excited about this opportunity.
And I will say to the board that, Mr. Miller's question about timing is really important. As with all of our projects and our initiatives, we are always looking at trying to put together a financial package to support them. And it can include federal dollars, state dollars, regional dollars, authority dollars, local dollars. We're always trying to put this together. And this is an opportunity for us. And what you're doing today is leaving that door open to submit the project. This project has to compete along with every other project that's been submitted. So this is just leaving that opportunity open, that should this compete and should it be recommended, that smart scale dollars could be part of that financial transaction.
Madam Secretary,
Mr. Smoot.
good morning. When will we know the amount available in smart scale for this round?
Do we know the amount of money? I don't know if that's been calculated yet. The budget just came out on Wednesday. Nick, do we have an idea?
So, Madam Secretary, Mr. Smoot, that's something that we would be able to provide to the board in advance of the January meeting. As the Secretary said, the revised 6-year forecast just came out earlier this week, and so there was some good news and some not as good news included in that. And so I think we're going through to revise that. If you may recall, in March, before the world was flipped upside down, we anticipated that the next round would be somewhere around 1.6 billion. And the round before that, Mr. Smoot, was about 850 million. We will not be at 1.6 billion and we will not be at 850. We will be somewhere between those 2 points. I think the thing we are still looking at is, does that mean we're at 1.2 or that we're at 1.4 or something of that nature? But my take from the preliminary figures I've seen is that we will be somewhere kind of clearly in the middle of those 2 figures. So we will be at an amount greater than what we had in round 3, which is great news. The flip side of that is we will not be at quite the record-setting level of 1.6 billion that we thought might be possible in March when we briefed you before we knew what the word COVID meant.
Thank you. That is good news.
Madam Secretary, it's Bert again.
Mr. Dodson?
I just want to say, go back to Nick's observation and Mary Hines' question about which area would submit the application. So are you saying, Nick, that you obviously have the Salem district, the Lynchburg district, the Culpeper district, and Northern Virginia district? Would you say the district that has the most stops would be coming through their district as far as smart scale process, or?
Yes, Madam Chair, Mr. Dodson, I think what we would probably look at is a mix of stops and passengers to try and make the determination. So kind of the example for like the highway project is where's the majority of the project located? And so I think for this, there's both the stop aspect and the anticipated passengers there. Again, if you look at it, it is, we only have 1 stop that's in area type D. You have 1 or 2 area type A, but the stops with the majority of passengers are in B and C. And so ultimately, I think we would end up in one of those 2 area types.
Yeah, refresh my memory. What does A, B, C, and D mean? What does that indicate?
So those were just the that was our way of keeping it straight when we developed Smart Scale back in 2014. The law required that we allow different parts of the state to weight different factors based on their needs. And so we created at that time 4 different ways of weighting the different factors. And so A generally is the most urban, and D generally is the most rural. And so to kind of what that then means in there is, like in A, congestion tends to be weighted the highest along with land use. And then in D, safety and economic development tend to be weighted the high, not tend, they are, weighted the highest. And so that's kind of a rough rule of doing that. One other thing, that we, I guess could explore is, trying to do some sort of proportional score where we actually use the specific area types for the various kind of projects. But I think most likely we would come back to you guys and say, this is the decision that was made after we kind of looked at the various factors about the stations and ridership amounts, excuse me, sir.
So ridership is the determining factor, or rail miles in the particular district?
It would not be rail miles, Mr. Dodson. We would want to focus on where the service is. Like this rail product is kind of different than a highway, where the actual service delivered with a highway is where the highway is, where a lot of times with rail, the service outcomes aren't necessarily next to where a potential capital improvement was made. So, for example, part of one of the capital improvements made as a part of the Roanoke extension wasn't even on the line that the Roanoke train ran on. It was on a different line, which allowed Norfolk Southern to shift more of their freight traffic to another line, freeing up capacity on that Roanoke line. And so, again, we would want to score it based on where the benefit is being received by the citizens of Virginia.
The last question is, I guess, a comment. Obviously, in Northern Virginia, there's plenty of rail. But obviously, in our part of the state, and obviously the Salem district, Lynchburg district, even the Culpeper district area, there's not that much rail. So that's what I'll make a point. And we depend on the rail, and everybody depends on the rail. But obviously, you have a lot more rail in Northern Virginia you have in our part of the state. Thank you, Nick.
I'm just going to make a comment. I think it's potentially a really great project. When you look at the volume that is currently experienced on this line, and you layer that with how successful the Virginia Breeze has been, I think there's a real need for this.
Thank you. I will just, I'll add that Mr. Kaskowitz, I remember when the I-81 corridor improvement plan was being put together, there were a few of us, and I know Mr. Kaskowitz was one, where really trying to create that opportunity with the I-81 funding, making sure we were committed to the $2.2 billion worth of highway improvements, but making sure we were setting aside some funds for multimodal, for safety, for operational improvements. And I'll say that the $43 million that has been invested along the I-81 corridor has actually been recognized nationally for those improvements. And there's a great return on these investments. So just want to add that, and really to the board for recognizing how important creating a multimodal platform across Virginia really is.
It's great that it happened so quickly, Madam Secretary. Thank you.
So yes. That was out the door, can I say, July 1, and that really goes to Commissioner Bridge. He's on the call this morning. As soon as the omnibus was passed, that was out the door. So anyone else on the board? Okay. With that, Mr. Carol, there's no one there for public comment. Ms. Mathis, can we proceed with the vote?
We can.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion that we approve the resolution as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor or opposition, please respond to the roll call.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. DeTomp,
Okay.
Mr. Dodson,
Gladly, yes.
Ms. Hines,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Kaskowitz.
Yes.
Mr. Malvin,
Yes.
Mr. Merrill,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Woo! That'd be yes.
Mr. Rucker,
Indeed.
Mr. Smoot,
Yay.
Mr. Stinson,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Just send him an email, Jason.
Mr. Yates.
Yes.
Thank you.
The roll's complete. The
I'm gonna
motion.
come join you on the beach there.
Somebody needs to mute. I wish I was on a beach.
Right?
Hello, everyone. thank you so much. I know all of us are very, very grateful for this vote as we continue to move forward. It is a unique opportunity. It has been a priority for a very, very long time. And so it is noteworthy to acknowledge that we are at this moment. And so I thank you very much for working with us through really, really an unprecedented year. And I can't really wait till we're able to look back on all this in person. So I thank you for that. I will, I was speaking with Commissioner Britch yesterday. There are moments when this job is very, very difficult. When people are hurt and killed on our roadways, it's something that being in transportation that you feel, because you always wonder, what more can we do and how do we promote safety? And I'm very grateful that there is a commitment to safety in the omnibus bill and just across Virginia. And as I joined the call this morning, you were talking about a gentleman who was hit by a tractor trailer 2 mornings ago. And his name is Matt Fitzgerald. He has given us permission to say his name. So, I just ask that we keep him in our thoughts and prayers, and all those who use all of our transportation system. And I know that you all feel that as well. We have a very important responsibility, and I know we push very hard to incorporate safety into all we do, and it really matters. And I just thank Commissioner Britch for caring so much for Chief Deputy Commissioner Rob Carey and their entire team. So as we hold all of our workers, our essential workers, the men and women who go out every day to take care of our transportation system, I think their role has been highlighted this year. We've recognized the incredible place they have in our everyday lives and in our economy. And so just in honor of them, I will adjourn this meeting and just wish for all of you a very safe and healthy and happy holiday season. So thank you.
Same to you, Madam Secretary.
Thanks. All
Yeah,
set.
happy holidays, everybody.
Everybody. Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Same to all. Bye.
Be safe, be well, everyone.
Happy holidays. Merry
Happy holidays, everyone.
Shannon, I was going to use this time to go out and get your Christmas gift, but now I've missed the window, so have a good Christmas.